G'day guys, how's it going? It's Castlegate here, bringing you another video of Gemcraft Frostborn Wrath. I've got a bit of a special one today because I've finally made a video about how to basically go ahead and play Gemcraft Frostborn Wrath in a way that is, well, a way that makes your life a lot easier. A lot of people find this game quite difficult, but I seem to figure out with a whole bunch of advice from others and so forth, and playing through the game myself, a method that will still be a little bit difficult. It will be a bit of a grind, but if you follow these steps, then this will actually make the game, at least in Frostborn mode, as easy as it gets. As far as I can tell, there is no easier way to play the game. It's difficult, it is a grind, but it can be done, and it can still be fun. So, without further ado, let's get to it. Actually, there is further ado. Before I start, just a quick little heads up, guys. Because of the YouTube algorithm and how difficult it is for anyone who's not already popular, any support you can show, I would really appreciate it. That comes in the form of subscriptions or liking videos or commenting on my videos. Please, by all means, share the love. I really appreciate any support you can offer. Now that we've got that out of the way, let's get straight into the video. What I've done here is I've created a spreadsheet basically just sort of showing at least notable fields, not every single field, but notable fields throughout your journey from top to bottom, where you will come across something about the field that is interesting, whether it be that it has a shrine or whether it has a wizard's stash, which when broken open will hold some stuff. There are wizard stashes that are not listed here, so if you see a field that has wizard stash and that field is not listed on this list, then that means that wizard stash is probably just holding a talisman fragment of sorts. Now, they're not anything to be sneezed at. Talisman fragments that are being held inside wizard stashes are generally quite strong, so what you want to do is essentially play through the game. And unlike my other videos that I've talked about previously in Gemcraft Chasing Shadows and also Gemcraft Labyrinth, you don't really want to try and skip certain fields and charge ahead. What you want to do, if you want to give yourself the best possible chances, is to actually play through just about every single field, especially the fields that have wizard stashes. If it's not relevant to your progression, in other words, you can skip a field because it doesn't have a wizard stash and it's not stopping you from being able to progress through to other fields, then you can skip a field. But all in all, you will be playing just about every single field in probably both endurance as well as journey mode. Maybe not so much endurance mode. For some fields, the wizard stashes are on journey mode. So, yeah. For those ones, you probably don't have to do any endurance runs on those. You probably safely skip them unless they're a really good field for endurance. But, yeah, wizard stashes. I cannot drum it into your heads enough. Crack open every single wizard stash you come across, because if it doesn't have a skill or a battle trait, it's containing either a lot of shadow cores or it's containing a field token that goes to somewhere else that might hold another wizard stash that has something even better in it, or like I said, it might have a talisman fragment. Anyway, let's go through this list very quickly, and then I'll go ahead and give you basically the rundown on the map in the game. So, what we have is basically a list of what you should expect to get, and I'll just skip the ones that say shadow cores. I just had those because I got them in a list from the internet somewhere. I think they're accurate. But let's go through the skills. First of all, you start off with your Orb of Presence when you go ahead and break open the wizard stash on field W1. It's not really that important. I suggest you don't really pay any attention to it and don't put any skill points in it at all, because honestly, you don't really get much of a benefit for putting some skill points, whatever precious few skill points you have right at the start of the game, in this particular skill. It's not very useful. You're not going to get much benefit of it. And honestly, you're better off just saving up your skill points and leaving them unspent, and instead starting each game with more mana, which basically is the benefit you get from not spending skill points. I'll show you a little bit more about that later. Let's see, you'll progress through. There's nothing else really interesting in, let's see, map tile W, but you will go ahead and break open all of those wizard stashes that you will find dotted around all of those fields in map tile W. I think there's 4 of them all up, because if it doesn't have this Orb of Presence skill, then it will either have Shadow Cores or it will probably have a couple of nice Talisman Fragments. Don't get rid of Talisman Fragments, especially early in the game. Keep them all and start putting them into your Talisman. Again, I'll show you that when we hop into the game. Let's see. Then you'll get to map tile S. Map tile S has your first battle trait. In S2, you can break open the Wizard Stash and get Haste. Haste is a very useful battle trait in that basically it, I think that's the one that makes Wavestones basically progress through faster. You can crank this all the way up to 12, giving you a nice big bonus to how much XP you're going to get, and you can also increase the drop rarity range of Talisman Fragments as you go through the battles as well, if you crank up battle traits, so that's a nice bonus. But the trade-off is that the Wavestones will come through much faster. If you crank it all the way to the maximum, which is 12, then basically your Wavestones will come through twice as fast as they normally would. So it's kind of manageable if you're not being overwhelmed with monsters, but yeah, just keep an eye on how you're going with that. Try and use it as much as you can. Haste is a good one to have. It's not an overly scary battle trait to crank up, but yeah, use your best judgment when you are playing through the fields. And lastly, you've got your first new building, if you can call it that, at field S4. You start off with Traps. Traps is a very, very important building to have. To be honest, just about every single building, well, except for lanterns, is going to be very important to your entire journey right up till the very last of the fields where you defeat the, what is it, the Forgotten or something like that? The main last boss. So, Traps is no exception. Traps is actually one of the major components that you require if you want to get some sort of functioning mana farm going. And we'll talk more about that later as well. Next, you'll move on to field... Well, you'll move on to field R, I think, first, and then you'll be able to move up to field V. So in R, you will get your second battle trait at R3, Adaptive Carapace. Basically, it's a nice little battle trait in that if you're generally one-shot or two-shotting every single monster with whatever gems you have on the field, then you won't really feel the pain from Adaptive Carapace. What it does is it reduces by a percentage the amount of damage that's coming in and resolving on the monster when it's hit by your gems every single time it's hit. It's like a cumulative hardening of their shell, if you will, right up to a maximum of, well, it depends on what you put the battle trait to. If you crank this battle trait all the way up to 12, then it will be a maximum reduction of 60% of all damage coming in, but that's only after it's hit something like 10 times. So every time a monster is hit, it reduces the amount of damage that comes to it with the next hit by 6%, and it does that 10 times up to a maximum of 60%. Again, it's not an overly scary battle trait. I suggest you go ahead and play around with this in tandem with Haste, and just keep on trying to get the drop rarity range going up and up and up as much as you can, and also getting as much experience as you can, because they both accumulate into you getting better fragments for your talisman and also more skills, which means more mana for the start of all of your games, which honestly at the early and even in the mid game is really what's most important to you. Until your focus shifts because you get to a certain point in the game, all you want is lots of mana at the start so that you can afford starting off with a tower and maybe even eventually a few amplifiers surrounding it, with a gem that is a reasonably high grade, and then you don't really have to do much more other than just upkeep what you have started with. Maybe add to it a tiny bit, but not much. And with very little effort, you should be able to breeze through just about every single, field. Or at least that will be, I suppose, the case for the first 30 or 40 odd fields that you'll play. Eventually things will get a little bit more difficult, but hopefully with a little bit of luck, especially with the fragments that you're getting for your talisman, you'll be able to get enough going to sort of help you stay ahead of that difficulty curve, and things won't snowball into the point where you just hate the game because you feel like you're boxed in, you've got no options, and you just want to delete it and move on to the next game. So let's try and avoid that. Now, interestingly, in map tile V and R, you've got a field that has something called a shrine. Shrines are very useful for trying to sort of cheat in getting lots of XP really early on in endurance. So you would beat these fields R4 and V2 in journey mode using whatever you have at your disposal, and then you would go ahead and play these fields again in endurance, and you would basically play the game. I'll show you a little demonstration of how to do this, but basically you would play the field as you normally would, trying to build up your defenses and so forth, and then what you would do is when you start to get slightly overwhelmed, all you do is you just go ahead and put a gem in the anger slot, and then you would send all of the waves that are remaining into the battlefield. Because it's endurance, basically when you lose, but it's not like you lose all your progress or you don't get anything for it. All you have to do is beat as many monsters as you can. Shrines are a very good way of basically cheating in a lot more damage than you're normally capable of outputting through your normal gems and so forth. And using that sort of strategy, bunching up all the monsters in the kill zones of your shrines, you hit the shrine a couple of times, you get a good number of kills, your XP all of a sudden skyrockets for that particular field, and then you just end endurance, and you watch your wizard levels go up like crazy. That's basically the general strategy. I'll show you in game, but V2 and R4 are good fields for that, especially V2. R4, the shrine isn't in a very good position, honestly. It's usable, but it's not as good as in V2. So, just keep these in mind when you're going ahead and playing. Try and play these particular fields in endurance, and try to use that strategy that I will show you a little bit later on, so that you get a lot more XP. Your wizard level will go up a lot, and therefore you will get a lot more skill points that you will not spend into your skills, because like I said, having mana at the start of every game is very important, and this will help sort of jumpstart you a little bit. Let's see, continuing with R4, you will get another skill called Resonance. This is actually an important skill, and at the start of the game, at this point in the game, you will be putting maybe some skill points to raise it up to 5 or even skill level 10 if you have enough skill points at this point, because Resonance basically does the simple job of making all of your gems hit harder. It gives them more damage, and also I think you use them, it's just a tiny bit more range as well. So Resonance, great, because honestly in the early game, unless you're trying to crack open wizard stashes and they've got lots of armor, you don't really care about the gem components of all of the gems that you're using in your towers. Trust me, you're just going for simple, raw damage. That's all you need to do. The best way to do that is to get 2 gems with 2 different colors and combine them together, so you get the negative effect of less components, special abilities on the gem, but in doing that, compared to a pure gem with just 1 color, a gem with 2 combined colors in it will have a little bit more damage, a little bit more range, and I think a little bit more firing speed as well. So that's what you want to do. Basically, from W1, make sure you've got grade 2 or grade 3 gems with at least 2 colors, hopefully just 2 colors, because I think 2 color gems have the best stats in terms of damage output, whereas I'm not so sure about gems with 3 colors and so forth. But you won't really have to worry about 3 or 4 colors mixed into gems for a while, because most of the fields will just start with only 2 predetermined colors of gems, which you'll just have to use. And until you start unlocking certain skills, you will be limited to whatever is given to you within the field at the start. So, R4, Resonance, go ahead and put some skill points in this one. It's worth it. It really is worth the trade-off. Let's see, then you'll be playing fields in V. So, map tile V. V1, you'll get another battle trait that is not a scary battle trait. It's another good, useful one. It can be a little bit of a double-edged sword, so be careful with it. But Overcrowd basically allows you to go ahead and overcrowd or oversaturate all of the wavestones with more monsters. So you will be dealing with more monsters. That's the painful part. But the upside is that not only will you get all the benefits of cranking up a battle trait, but you will also have more monsters to kill. And with those kills, you will essentially get more mana from the kills than if you didn't put in Overcrowd. So think of it as that sort of double-edged sword. And also be very careful when using Haste and Overcrowd combined, because without these battle traits on at all of your battles will sort of consist of like a wavestone comes into play, some monsters trickle in, you kill them, and then you wait a few seconds, nothing's really happening until the next wavestone comes up, and this kind of repeats, more or less. But with Haste and Overcrowd both cranked up, it's basically wavestones just continue to come along, monsters are continuing to generate, and it's just like a constant wave of monsters. So unless you're set up with lots of towers with lots of decent grade gems that can handle that sort of, raw amount of numbers of monsters to try and shoot at and kill, then I suggest you be careful with these, putting them in together. Get a feel for them. You can put them in a little bit, but generally speaking, when it comes to the benefits of using battle traits, it's better to use 1 battle trait cranked up to the max than putting 2 battle traits up even halfway. It just doesn't work like that, because the benefit of putting more points into a battle trait is actually, it's not linear, it's exponential. So, and you'll see that when you put more points in the battle trait, as you look at the amount of drop rarity range and all of that stuff go up, it doesn't really move much between 1 and 5, but between 10 and 12 it moves a lot. So keep that in mind. And lastly, V4, you're going to get a very important building. It's Amplifiers. You don't have to put any skill points in them. It's okay to use 1 or 2 amplifiers every now and then within your journey from this point onwards without having any skill points put into them. You can put skill points into them if you really want to, put them up to skill level number 5. But I recommend you wouldn't put them in there anymore, because honestly, at this point in the game, you're probably still not powerful enough to even afford amplifiers, or if you can, you won't have them on the field much. So there's not really going to be much of a benefit to put anything into amplifiers yet, so don't bother. Next up will be Map Tile N. Map Tile N has an interesting one. In N1, the Wizard Stash contains a field token for R6. So then you can go ahead and play R6 and get yourself a sweet little talisman fragment, I think, by memory. Also, a couple of things to note in fields N2 and N3. There are some mana shards that will be the first time that you incur any mana shards. So basically, mana shards are kind of annoying, out of the way things that are off the beaten path that monsters walk on. And they're kind of like a little bit of a tempt, more often than not. They'll be sort of in a position whereby if you put any of your gems in towers nearby to try and whittle them down, chances are those gems in those towers won't be in good positions to go ahead and also simultaneously attack all the monsters that are coming into the field. So use your best judgment with mana shards, but generally speaking, mana shards are a kind of convenient way, if you can afford the extra resources at the start, to try and get some extra mana into your life really early in the field by just slowly whittling away that mana shard until it depletes. It's pretty much just a straight up whatever mana you harvest from the shard goes straight into your mana pool. So they can be good, but just don't overinvest your resources at the start of each field that has a mana shard in it in going ahead and trying to harvest from mana shards, okay? Use your best judgment. Now, N3 is interesting because it's got mana shards, it's got a shrine, which is great for endurance, and also it has a skill. Now, this is going to be this skill inside the wizard stash is going to be your first skill to have a gem component. This is armor tearing. Armor tearing for you is incredibly important because armor tearing is a skill that you can pump points into if you really need to, if you need to whittle down the armor on a wizard stash on any field at all in the future that has an insane amount of armor on it. If you're really struggling to get those wizard stashes open, you know what? Just put armor tearing up to skill level 10 or 15 or 20 and then focus all of your armor tearing gems near that wizard stash onto that wizard stash only and watch the armor just melt away. Okay? That is honestly the only and really good use of mana tearing. It's really good for breaking open wizard stashes, but you'll find later on in the game when you're close to completing it, armor tearing becomes almost completely pointless. But yeah, you'll discover that later. For the early game, armor tearing is probably one of the most important gem types you can get. Moving on, O2 will have battle trait, which is Corrupted Banishment. Corrupted Banishment is yet again another battle trait which almost works like a freebie, I suppose, because it really only makes your life difficult if you are banishing monsters at your monster orb, or your wizard orb, sorry. So if you can avoid having any monsters go ahead and be banished by your wizard orb, then this is kind of a freebie. You can crank this battle trait all the way up to 12, but do know that if you do end up banishing some monsters, what's going to happen is they're going to have their overall amount of hit points increased by an insane amount. Their current hit points, whatever it is, also increased by that same insane amount. They will have their armor increased by like thousands, which at this point in the game you don't want to happen. And also, they will, when they're banished, gain 24 shields that you need to whittle down. So, not great. Be careful with Corrupted Banishment. If you're easily one-shotting just about every single monster that comes near you, and you're not even coming close to leaking any monsters, then by all means, crank this one all the way up to 12. But just know there's a very, very heavy penalty for whenever the monsters get banished if you are leaking monsters. And the worst part is, once a monster gets banished, it gets all of those stats and then it runs through the maze, and you know what, if you don't kill it the second time, guess what, it's going to get banished, and then all of that just multiplies. It's like a cumulative exponential effect of monsters just getting tougher and tougher and tougher. And honestly, it might even get to the point where it might very quickly get to the point where you will not be able to beat those monsters ever. You will never have anywhere near enough damage output or armor tearing or anything. And you're going to lose that particular field. So be careful with Corrupted Banishment. Next up, in P1, yes, that's right, we're going down the field just a little bit before we go across and up the field. Basically, at, I think it was map tile R, you've got a choice. You can either go down the field or you can go across to the right, which helps you snake all the way back up towards the top left, which is where there is another very important wizard stash to break open. You go down first because there are some goodies down there that you might want to grab before you start heading across. So after R4, you'll go down, do N1, N2, N3. You'll do all of the fields in map tile O, and then you'll move down even further down towards the left for map tile P. You won't complete all of map tile P, but you will do most of it. Leave field P5 because it's a bit of a pain and it requires a lot of skill points to be put into poison, and also, if possible, lots of skill points to put into mana leeching. And guess what? You don't have mana leeching yet, so leave P5 alone, but do P1, 3, and 4. P1 has the poison skill, which is very important because poison inside traps is quite devastating to a lot of monsters, and it can make your life a lot easier. Let's see. And P4 has a battle trait that you will not really use at all, called Giant Domination. Basically, it pumps up giants and makes them giants on steroids, and they're super tough, and you won't be able to deal with them, so just ignore this battle trait for the moment. It's just nice to have. Now, after finishing P4, you're going to go back up to near where map tile R is, and you're going to continue to the right to map tile Q. Q1 has a bolt skill, which is incredibly important for you, because honestly, bolt is one of those gem enhancement skills that allows you to, I think you only get like 8 or 9 shots or something of bolt every time you enhance a gem with it. But a gem in a tower with bolt, those bolts will ignore armor. Something very important to remember if you're attacking buildings or wizard stashes. If you have a wizard stash that has lots of armor but not really that much hit points, you know what? Give your gem inside your tower bolt as an enhancement. Make sure it's focused onto the wizard stash by selecting the wizard stash or making the target priority into, I think it's structures, and just try and melt away the hit points, ignoring the armor on that wizard stash. Hopefully with a few jolts with bolt, it will just go down, and that's a convenient way of quickly breaking open wizard stashes. So give it a shot. Just remember that it's there and it's good. It's also useful for taking down any really large enemies as well. It's a good utility enhancement to have. Bolt, very useful. Let's see. I think that's pretty much it of the interesting stuff in map tile Q, because then you move on to even further to the right for map tile T, where you will go ahead and find in T1 the lantern skill. Lanterns, I'm going to be straight up with you, they're bloody useless, so just ignore them. T3 has a field token to unlock T5 if that's really what you want. I'm not going to stop you. Go ahead and crack it open. Crack open the wizard stash in T5 and get yourself a reasonably sweet, I think it's a talisman fragment of sorts. Now, T4 has a battle trait in its wizard stash. It's Swarmling Parasites. Swarmling Parasites are for swarmlings, as Giant Domination is for giants. Don't use either of these, okay? Just let them sit there. Don't use them yet. They are just way too difficult for you to deal with. Swarmling Parasites doesn't pump up the swarmlings in terms of armor and hit points and stuff like Giant Domination does, but what it does do is that it will go ahead and make whatever negative effects that you apply to swarmlings with a duration on them, such as bleeding or slowing or poison, it will make that effect time out a lot faster. So any negative effect you give them isn't going to last long. That includes also strike spells such as Whiteout and also Ice Shards as well, and Freeze. So it makes swarmlings very resistant to anything you throw at it. And on top of that, it also makes the swarmlings run even faster. Swarmlings do run fast already, so the last thing you want is for them to become turbo swarmlings. Oh, and by the way, something I did mention with Giant Domination, with these particular both of these battle traits, the more that you put into this battle trait, up to the maximum of 12, I think, the more Reaver waves turn into waves for giants or swarmlings. Up to a maximum of, I think, around 36%, so just over a third of Reaver waves will turn into either swarmling waves or giant waves, or, you know, basically you're making your life really difficult if you use these two battle traits, so do yourself a favour, just for the moment, ignore them. Next up, U3 is a great place to be, because U3, it will be difficult the very first time you play it, but hopefully it won't be too difficult later on, and you'll be able to revisit it and get some pretty sweet XP out of it. There is a shrine here, so great for endurance runs. There are also mana shards, not much, but there are some mana shards there, 2 of them, so you can sort of get a tiny bit of a jump start in your mana. You're going to need it, trust me. And also, when you crack open the wizard stash, you'll get pylons as building. Pylons are an interesting building. They're actually quite useful in terms of trying to take down giant monsters if your gems in your towers, even with amplifiers and so forth, are not quite making the cut. What you can do is you can go ahead and put down a pylon nearby, and you can instead have your gem attack the pylon, and you can even use something like beam, or what's best is to use bolt as an enhancement on your gem in your tower to attack that pylon, and all of a sudden that pylon will, honestly, it will take a while to charge up with shots being fired at it from your gem, but the pylon does insane amounts of some bounce damage to a few monsters. So it's really, pylons are a great building for taking down giants that have an insane amount of hit points or armor, but they're not great for when you're taking on lots and lots of swarmlings. So use your best judgment when it comes to pylons, but pylons, generally speaking, dish out a lot of good damage. Unfortunately, however, pylons cannot target other structures, so you can't use them to crack open wizard stashes, which kind of sucks, but it is the way it is. Moving on, U4 is also kind of interesting, but not really. There's some more mana shards on U4, and also the wizard stash has some shadow cores, which is nice, because early game, you're going to want shadow cores to unlock talisman tiles so that you can fit more fragments into your talisman, and hopefully give yourself enough room to activate as many talisman bonuses as you can. I'll get to that later on as well. Or you can just watch my other video from a while ago about talisman fragment bonuses or something like that. After you'll move up towards the center in map tile Y. Y1 holds a battle trait, Swarming Domination. Oh yeah, I just talked about that. Avoid using it. Let's see, Y2 has mana shards. Oh, I completely skipped U3 when I was talking about Swarming Domination. I don't know why I did that, sorry about that. But anyway, Y2 has some mana shards. Good for a small jump start, I suppose, if you're doing endurance or something like that. Y3 has the freeze skill. This is going to be your first strike spell. This is a spell that you can use on monsters while they are running around the map. Basically, it does exactly what it says. It freezes monsters, not for long, only a few seconds, but at least it does that, and you can charge up and stack up 2 of them so you can hit them in rapid succession. And also, yes, if you freeze the same monsters twice, the amount of time duration that they have for being frozen stacks on. So don't be afraid to freeze the same monsters twice if that suits your strategy for some reason. Next up we have Y4 has a field token to Z1, which is very, very important. I cannot stress enough, get that field token, because you want Z1, you want to get into map tile Z to get some incredibly useful goodies. And also there's some mana shards there just to make your life a little bit easier when trying to get that field token from the wizard stash. But before you go to field or map tile Z, take a journey to the right to map tile X, where you can go ahead and For X3, there will be some mana shards, but they will have some, I think they have some sort of shell on them, so you have to whittle away the shell before you can start harvesting the mana, which means there's going to be a little bit of a delay on getting that bonus mana into your mana pool. Is it X3? I can't remember. I think it might be X3. Or is it Z3? I think Z3 is the one with the mana shards that have shells on them. So X3 might not have it. And I know that X4 doesn't have shells on their mana shards. So, yeah, I think these ones are okay. They're kind of safe. But when you get up to as far as, once you're getting beyond Y, map tile X and map tile Z, they hold some, shall we say, formidable fields. This is where you're going to start to begin to slow down a little bit, and you might need to have more than one go at a field because the difficulty starts to ramp up a little bit, especially in map tile Z. For some reason, the difficulty all of a sudden just skyrockets quite a bit. It's really quite difficult. We'll talk about that in a second. But in X3 and X4, there's mana shards, and also X4 holds another gem enhancement skill, which is Beam. This one is probably the most versatile and most important gem enhancement you will ever get in this game. Beam is great because when you use it on a gem in a tower, it looks like a constant beam of energy is being expelled from it. Now, it's not quite as simple as that. It's something pretty close. It's basically a kind of like a instant attack that repeats extremely fast. Beam is great as an enhancement on gems in towers because you can use Beam to either quickly take care of an overwhelming amount of swarmlings that are near your tower, or you can use Beam to go ahead and quickly whittle away either shields from a wizard stash that has shields, or if you apply Beam to a gem that has armor tearing in it, then it can be used as a enhancement to quickly whittle away armor from a wizard stash that's nearby. Mind you, the range of Beam is like incredibly small, very close to around the tower where you are, so whatever you're applying Beam to, it had better be close to the target you want it to take down. And also, lastly, Beam, because of its high fire rate, is also useful for quickly trying to whittle down mana shards. That's right, you can harvest mana shards a lot quicker with Beam. Now that's something that you can keep in mind, especially a lot further down in your journey, where you might need to harvest some mana from some corrupted mana shards. Corrupted mana shards are like mana shards, except they'll give you some mana, but in doing so, for the privilege, your gems that are attacking that corrupted mana shard, their damage output, both minimum and maximum, will go right down to something insanely low, like 2 and 4. That's for any grade gem at all. So Beam is kind of a great way to get a lot of mana quickly out of a grade 1 gem that is near a corrupted mana shard. Just something also to keep in mind. Beam is, I'm telling you, it's the most versatile. It's more important than having Bolt if you want to make good progress and keep on being able to open up wizard stashes. Okay? Next, we move on to the infamous map tile Z, which honestly is a pain. Firstly, Z1 has a battle trait. It's Insulation. Insulation is a very simple and straightforward battle trait to understand what's going on. But yeah, basically, Insulation gives monsters shields. The more you crank up this battle trait, the more shields every single monster is going to get, which means they're basically going to become a lot more difficult to beat because you have to take care of the shields first before you can start damaging the monsters. There is an exception to this rule with shrines, because shrines actually ignore shields as far as I can tell. Don't quote me on that. Or maybe shrines have some sort of attack that happens multiple times, which means it takes down the shields and still applies its damage to monsters. I don't know exactly how it works, but shrines, generally, you can imagine them as something that ignores shields, but insulation, this early in the game, you're not going to want to use this one. It's a scary battle trait. Ignore it. Don't even put 1 into it. You're just making your life so much more difficult, because if you're trying to one-shot monsters for the most part, now you're two-shotting monsters and you've just made your life literally twice as difficult for all of the gems on the field. So don't use insulation. I'm not even going to... Just don't mess around with it. Z3 has some mana shards, but these mana shards, like I said before, they have a shell on them. And also, interestingly, the mana shards that are in journey mode are in the same spot as the mana shards and the same size as the mana shards in endurance, but the ones in journey mode have a lot less mana in them to be harvested. The ones in endurance, for some reason, have a lot more, and I mean a hell of a lot more mana in them. I think in journey mode you get a maximum of like between 4 mana shards on the field. You get all up something like around 40,000. Was it 14 or 40,000 mana? Whereas in endurance, it's well over 200 combined mana from the same 4 mana shards. So this is also why in this particular video I'm not actually listing any specifics about the mana shards in the field, because honestly, if I wanted to be really thorough, I'd have to tell you the count, how much shield and mana is in each of the shards, and then I'd have to do the same thing over again for the same shards in endurance, and it's just a pain. So let's just say there's mana shards there, and there's a lot of mana to be harvested from those mana shards, but you'll find field Z3 should be a little bit difficult. So be wary. It might be a good idea to try and harvest mana shards. It might be a good idea for you to put down some walls to allow the gems that you have in towers attacking those mana shards to also be able to attack all the monsters that come in. So that way they're not focusing too much on the mana shards and you're just going to be leaking monsters like crazy. That's a terrible strategy. But Z3, even with all of that mana shard potential on field, remember, it takes a while to whittle down all of these mana shards. They do take a long time to get all the mana from them, so you'll be getting a mana benefit, but by the same token, all the monsters that are coming in, they're getting tougher in fields in Z, especially Z3. It's really tough. So don't be dismayed if you don't beat Z3 the first time around, but just stick with it and try and crack open that wizard stash for another, I think it's just another talisman fragment, but it's a half decent one, especially for what you're trying to get at this point in the game. And then we have field Z4. This has the field token of Z5, but honestly this is a real pain to get. Field Z4, the wizard stash is put in the most inconvenient place, right, just to the right of the wizard orb, and there's nowhere really for you to be able to fit or put any towers that can attack both the wizard stash and also the monsters that are going towards your wizard orb. It's just a really inconvenient spot, so you're going to have to divide your forces between something attacking or a whole bunch of stuff actually attacking the wizard stash, and also gems basically defending what is honestly a very straight-ish and horrible path that the monsters are going to take. It's a very difficult field. Don't underestimate it, and good luck, because the wizard stash, here's the thing, it's not the most difficult thing to sort of set yourself up to start whittling down that wizard stash while also defending off monsters. But eventually, with endurance and the way it is, and how monsters, as the waves progress, monsters get tougher a lot more quicker, you'll find that Z4, the wizard stash, is just going to take an insanely long amount of time to take down, possibly 2 long of a time to take down most of the time, and you'll find yourself frustratingly not quite doing enough damage to it before you lose to banishing monsters too much. Even with all of your battle traits cranked right down to nothing and trying to make this field as easy as possible in endurance to beat the Wizard Stash in, it's still going to be tough, so just be warned, okay? Wizard Stash in Z4, I think it has something insane like 444,444 hit points or some ridiculous number like that. It's a huge number. I don't think it has any armor or shields. It's just got an insane amount of hit points, which takes you an insane amount of time to try and whittle down, especially when you're not using gems that can be, put towards defending monsters with as well. So honestly, you got to try and take down all of those hit points, even using your gem enhancement skills. It's really difficult. So you're going to be stuck there trying to get the field token for Z5 for a while, but eventually when you do, you will get to Z5. Z5 has one giant mana shard right in the middle, and it's a doozy. I don't think it has any shell, or if it does, it's not much. I don't think it has a shell. It's just one giant mana shard with like almost 100,000 mana in it, and it's in a great spot. This field is probably going to be the first field that you come across where there is only one gem available to you, and it's the Mana Leeching Gem. And surprise, surprise, this particular field is all about Mana Leeching. So guess what? In the Wizard Stash, you'll get a skill. It's Mana Leeching. So by this time, you've got half of the gems unlocked. You'll have Armor Tearing, you'll have Poison, and Mana Leeching. Once you have this, then guess what? Mana Leeching, along with the traps that you got from ages ago, plus I don't think there's anything else that helps your cause. Not at this point, no. Then basically, you kind of have the ingredients for the beginnings of endurance runs that will contain mana farms. Okay? You won't be using mana farms yet inside your journey modes, where you're starting off playing all of the fields for the first time. But honestly, this is where your game actually will take a turn. You will start to use mana farms, just little ones, just 4, 5, 6 traps with maybe grade 3 gems, all with mana leeching in them. You'll put maybe mana leeching as a skill up to 10 or 15. You'll put traps up to 10, 15, or even 20 as well. And you will probably want to dial down just about everything else, including, resonance as well, actually. And instead you'll just focus on trying to get a lot of mana being leeched from monsters in endurance, and trying to get yourself to a point where your mana farm is generating a lot of mana, and you're able to keep on spending that mana every now and then on upgrading whatever gem you have that you're using to defend with, and hopefully you will be able to continue to beat endurance and get more waves added to the end of your endurance, so you can go further and further and further. And once you've done that a few times, and don't feel... By the way, once you've got this Mana Leeching Gem, don't be afraid to stop progressing for a little while and just start replaying other fields that you've gone over before. I believe fields like S2 are wonderful places to try and start doing mana farms on, because it's just a single entrance, a single exit point where the path is clear. The path you can fit lots and lots of traps on that path. The path itself, the entrance isn't so close to the exit, so your gem that you're going to be using to defend and destroy monsters with can be put fairly far back on the path and not interfere with the mana farm's ability to generate mana by having monsters stay nice and healthy and run over the mana farm. You can do that, and I encourage you to do that a few times to try and just find a couple of nice little fields that you thought, oh yeah, that'd be good for a mana farm. Even field, honestly, Z5 itself is a great field for putting a mana farm on. Just slap a few walls down in the right places, get a nice little snaking mana farm with lots and lots of traps in them. You'll be basically trying to beat giants for the most part, so even if your mana farm is doing nothing more than wasting the giant's time before the giants eventually come towards where your main kill gem is, your main kill gem will be positioned in a place where it will be harvesting from the main mana shard that's there for a long time anyway. So you know what? That'll give you a jump start with your mana as well. So yeah, Z5, S2, and I think there's a couple of other fields that you might like trying to do endurance on. Try and keep on playing endurance. Try beating endurance again and again and again until you can't beat endurance anymore. And then once you get to that point where you've got a lot more wave stones available in your endurance, then I encourage you to go to every single place that you've been to already that has a shrine. Well, maybe not those, but these ones. V2, R4, maybe not so much R4, but give it a crack anyway. N3, and also, have you been to this point? Yeah, you have. U3 as well. They are all great places with shrines in reasonably good positions where you can go ahead and retry the same endurance shrine trick, only this time you'll probably be able to hopefully afford a lot more gems on the field. You'll be able to even make a mana farm that will help you last a little bit longer so that you can get yourself more established with stronger gems, more gems on the field, more gems in traps, more gems in general. The more gems you have on the field, just sheer number of gems, doesn't really matter so much the grade, then the more the multiplier is that the shrine will get when it applies the amount of damage that it wants to apply to all the monsters in its kill zones. It is good to have 1 or 2 gems that have an insanely high grade, just so that raw damage output that gets multiplied is nice and high. But that's basically how you do it, and that's how you use the shrines. Again, put a really high grade gem inside the anger slot and then send all the waves, hit the shrine a couple of times, get much, much higher scores that will give you much, much higher XP, which will give you much more wizard levels, and then just get out of there. Same trick over and over again. Do that a few times. Then once you've finished having fun doing that, then you'll start to go back and progress. It's time to do P5. P5 is one of those fields that forces you to actually go ahead and think outside the square. P5, you cannot build any towers on P5 at all. Instead, you have to use traps. But by this time, you have both mana leeching and poison. Guess what 2 gems you can use in journey mode on field P5? It's poison and mana leeching. So, I suggest to you, put a trap with poison gems focused to attack monsters that are least affected by gem specials at the very starts of all 4, I believe, yes, 4 entrances, and also more traps with the same sorts of gems at the junction points as well. And if you really want some traps a little bit further down towards the monster orb in both paths, again, all of this will only have poison as your grade, would be grade 2 or grade 3 gems in traps, and that's how you take care of just about all the monsters that come in. Most of the time it will be swarmlings, but every now and then you'll get another wave that's either reavers, or I think painfully at the very end you'll get a wave with giants, which kind of sucks, but it's not the worst thing in the world to have to deal with. You can also try and get a cheeky little mana farm started. Sort of, I suggest you put just 2 traps after the poison gem that you will put in a trap at the junction points. So basically, you're mana farming a tiny bit off all the monsters that make it past that junction bit with poison. So hopefully they'll die from the poison, but before they do, you steal a little bit of mana from them. It's one of those things, it's kind of important, very useful to do, because even just that little bit of extra mana that you're leeching from the monsters, it builds up to being a very useful amount that will enable you to basically get all of your gems that are poison up to a much higher level, and you won't struggle with the field. Trust me, if you don't use this strategy on field P5, you're going to struggle a lot. And you're going to struggle if you don't have the ability to put some points in mana leeching, and more importantly, more points in poison for this one-time field, where you will be putting lots of points into poison. That's how you take care of P5. P5 is a pain. P6 is also a pain, but it's not so much of a pain, and you'll be able to figure it out. So, moving swiftly along. Oh, and once you've beaten field P5, get rid of all the points that you put into poison. You're not going to need them anymore. This is about the point where poison we say goodbye to poison as a useful component. It stops being useful after P5. Okay, moving on, we have L3, which is, well, we do map tile L. Continue to try and open up all the wizard stashes that you come across for more fragments or more cores, or in the case of L3, you'll get demolition skill. Demolition is kind of one of those things that's could be kind of useful a little bit later on, but at this point in your journey, you don't really care about it. So trust me, don't put any points into this. You don't need your gem wasps to be stronger, and you don't need those extra demolitions available to you. If you do, then I suggest you rethink your strategy, because you shouldn't have to worry about that or rely on it. And also, just to make the field a little bit easier, there's some mana shards there, so have at it. Then we'll move over to field or map tile K. Oh, by the way, we will ignore field L5 because L5 requires barrage and you don't have it yet, so you're going to have to skip L5. Move over to K1. Battle trait Dark Masonry is waiting for you at K1. Dark Masonry is one of those things, it's kind of a little bit like, where is it? Corrupted Banishment, in that if you use it correctly, this battle trait is actually a freebie as well. If you play on fields such as, what's after Q again? I think there's a field on Q where there's like a lot of open space for the monsters to come in and walk on, and all of the monsters come from just about the whole area that is the bottom of the screen or the bottom of the map. And then there's all of this area that has all of these trees around it. So basically, you've got no buildable area outside of the walkable area. None of it's buildable. And believe it or not, beacons specifically only appear in buildable, non-walkable areas. So there are some fields where you can crank Dark Masonry as a battle trait up to 12, and it will pretty much whiff every single time. And it's honestly, it's a freebie. So use Dark Masonry carefully, but always use it where you can. Another thing that you can do if you're starting with enough mana is to instead use Dark Masonry all the way up to 12 all the time, and hopefully before you reach wave 10, what you can do is you can put for all of the areas on the map that are buildable, that monsters cannot walk on, you can put a wall tile on one in every 4 buildable tiles, if that makes any sense. So that way you're putting down the minimum number of walls, which makes it as cheap as possible for you. But if you put down a grid that has, like, you know, 1 in every 4 tiles covered, then beacons that have a requirement to build on a 2x2 buildable non-walkable tile area, there's going to be no valid spots for them to spawn on. So if you do that before wave 10 kicks in, then you've handled the battle trait for Dark Masonry, and that will always whiff, and you'll never have to worry about it, and that's just free points into your battle trait and free benefits. So Dark Masonry, use it sparingly, but know when you can use it, and if you can, abuse it. Okay? Let's see. K3, there's some mana shards. Have fun with that. And then once you've finished with map tile K, you'll move to map tile J. J1 has a very, well, I wouldn't say very important, but I would say reasonably important skill. It's the True Colors skill. True Colors allows you to get a little bit more out of your gem components and gem damage for all gem types. Okay? It's nowhere near as effective as putting the same amount of skill points into one specific gem component as a skill, but it's kind of a little bit of a group hug situation. So True Colors, it can be useful, especially when you start putting a lot of points in, say, mana leeching, for example, and you find every time you tick up the skill one more, you're using a lot of skill points. It might actually be beneficial for you to instead put some skill points into True Colors, which will have a much lower skill number, basically to get the same effect. In other words, you're using your skill points more efficiently. True Colors is quite useful, all things considered, so it's a good skill to have. J2 has mana shards and a shrine and is great for using and abusing for endurance. Same story with J4. J4 has lots of mana shards and a shrine, and you can even create a nice little mana farm style maze if you're so inclined within J4 as well. So that's a great field to abuse the shrine in for endurance. And lastly, J4 also has a battle trait in its own Wizard's Dash, which is Vital Link. Now, I'm just going to tell you, Vital Link, you're not going to use that for a very long time. Just ignore it. Don't use it. Moving along, you are going to move up to map tile M, which, interestingly, M3 is the first and really only interesting one that you will worry about. M3 has mana shards, and it has the skill that you need to go back and beat field L5, and that is Barrage. Okay, there are wizard locks on field L5, wizard locks that require, I think, physical damage or freeze damage, requires bolt damage, beam damage, and barrage damage. So you're not able to beat L5 until you've got barrage. So congratulations, M3, you get the barrage skill. Don't bother putting any points in any of these strike or enhancement skills, by the way. Yeah, just having them is good enough. You don't want to waste your points on those. You'd rather have them saved up so that you start the game with more mana every time you play a game. And lastly, M4 does have a shrine, but honestly it's in a terrible spot. And also M4 has, I think, 2 paths that never ever meet until they're right at the wizard orb. So M4, it's a terrible place. So you know what? Just ignore this shrine when it comes to endurance. Just use and abuse every single other field that has a shrine that came before it, except for maybe the one exception is R4. R4 you can use and abuse it, but you know what? Use and abuse all of the other ones first because they're much better. Now, moving on from Barrage, N5, that's right. Before you were only able to play the first 3 fields of N5 and then that map tile N, and that was it. Now, through going through the back way and using map tile M, you were able to go ahead and play N4 and N5. N5 has a skill. It's the gem for slowing that skill component. So, at this point now you have 4 gem components that you can use. So you're starting to unlock quite a lot. You're getting quite enabled at this point. Once you've done N5, honestly, at any point after you got Barrage, you could have gone back to beat L5, but maybe you waited until after you got to this dead end and finished N4 and N5. Then you can go back and finish off L5 and move on down to G. G2 has a field token for K5, which is kind of interesting, but not really. And G3 has the skill Whiteout. This is a strike spell. It's kind of like freeze, except instead of freezing monsters, it slows monsters. But the interesting thing about Whiteout is that it slows monsters down, but it makes them more susceptible to damage. So Whiteout is good to make monsters more susceptible to being destroyed by your gems in towers or even your gems in traps, whichever your poison is at this point. Mind you, having said that, freeze is even better, I find, because when you destroy a monster that's frozen, it has something called Frozen Corpse Explosion, whereby when the monster dies, if it was frozen, instead of just dying and fizzling out, it dies in a spectacular, glorious explosion, which actually damages monsters around it. So usually, especially with a group of giant monsters, I try and group them up together, and then I freeze them. Then I use an enhancement like maybe Bolt on my main firing gem, and I will just take out one of the monsters in the middle that's frozen, and you know what, that will generally just take care of the other monsters that are immediately in its vicinity as well. So Frozen Corpse Explosion, keep that particular mechanic in mind and abuse it to quickly wipe out a whole bunch of strong monsters if you can. Okay, but Whiteout is a good secondary alternative and a good strike spell, all things considered. Once you finish with field J, map tile G, move down to map tile F. There is only one interesting place to go here when it comes to things other than, you know, Shadow Cores or what are they? Talisman Fragments. F2 holds the battle trait Strength in Numbers. Just like Vital Link, you're going to ignore this, okay? You're just not strong enough to deal with that, so ignore those two. Move on to map tile H. There's some interesting stuff going on here. Firstly, H2 has probably the best shrine setup when it comes to abusing shrines in Endurance, because H2 has, and as far as I can tell, is the only field in the entire game that has 2 shrines. And guess what? You know what? The good news is even better, because with these 2 shrines, believe it or not, they actually, I think they start off with a cooldown timer that's even smaller than most shrines in other fields. So, yeah, have at it. It's great. And you know what? When you beat the wizard stash on it, you get a field token for H5. Woohoo! Again, it's just kind of a means to an end where you get an even better Talisman Fragment, but it's randomized, so it could be useful, could not be useful. Either way, I encourage you, again, as always, to beat every single field if you can, and also crack open every single wizard stash if you come across them. Let's see. H3 has a battle trait, Thick Air. Ignore that as well. Moving on, H4 has a skill. This is your last strike skill. It's strike spell, I should say. It's called Ice Shards. Ice Shards is one of those skills that it does a few things, but you would mostly use it to try and use its ability to essentially burn a percentage of hit points from all monsters that are within its area of effect. No matter how strong or weak those monsters are, you can whittle down, I think, 10 or 15% of their hit points per shot. So you know what? Save up and use Ice Shards on really, really strong giants or something that you have on the field that you're struggling to beat. It's a very simple way to cheat out and get a hell of a lot of damage done. Moving on from map tile H, we're moving down a little bit to map tile E, where we will go ahead and get the skill Fury. Fury is interesting. Fury basically enables you, especially in Endurance, to get just more XP total out of the field. And also, if you're angering waves, there's a secondary bonus that ticks up every time you tick up the Fury skill by multiple of 5, where it will also make all angering effects on monsters a lesser effect. So in other words, by angering monsters with the same grade gem, with Fury up and up and up and up and up in skill level, your effective angering doesn't make the monsters as strong as they would be. Okay, it's not much of an effect, but it's a little bit of an effect, and it can be useful. So keep Fury in mind as one of those things. Just play around with putting a few points into them to get it up to 10, 15 or so. You may need to trade with skill points from other areas as well, other skills, just to get Fury up. But Fury is great, especially if you're doing endurance runs. So keep that in mind. Useful skill. E3 has a token to E5, and E4 is one of those relevant to the story or the journey sort of things going on with it. Basically, E4 starts with what looks like lots of mana shards, but very quickly they turn into corrupted mana shards. Like I said before, you know what? Just have one grade 1 gem sitting there firing at a corrupted mana shard somewhere off in the top right or something like that. And you know what? Just give it beam every now and then. And by doing that, whenever you give it beam, you're essentially giving yourself an extra free 200 or 300 mana over the next, 3 seconds. It's, if you can afford the beam enhancement skill at the time, then by all means, just do it. It's a little bit of free mana. And aside from that, I think E4 does have a very important and a very difficult to crack open wizard stash, because once you get that wizard stash open, which by the way I think has like 1,100,000 armor and hit points or something insane like that. Once you bust open that wizard stash, you will get field token for I1. It is your way of unlocking the entire map tile I. You'll want to do that because there's something very important in map tile I. Firstly, you will find in map tile I2 has battle trait Awakening. This is another scary battle trait, just ignore it for the moment. These all become useful a lot later on down the track, but for now, just ignore them. I3, I think I3 was the field that became infamous very early on after the game was released, and then the author had to put out a patch to stop it from doing something. Basically, I think there was a drop box on the field, which when you cracked it open in Endurance, would always give you a rarity 100 Talisman fragment. It was insane, and people abused it to quickly get enough rarity 100 Talismans to fill up their entire talisman with, and it was very easy. You would just start Endurance, put down your tower, give it Bolt when it when it cooled down. This is all in Endurance, mind you. Attack the drop box, open it up, get the free 100 rarity Talisman fragment, end Endurance straight away without even killing a single monster, and rinse and repeat over and over and over again, and just keep getting rarity 100 fragments. The game author had to patch that out, so unfortunately that doesn't exist anymore, and apparently he patched it out within a couple of days of releasing the game, so I wasn't quick enough to even get to this point to be able to abuse it. So yeah, opportunity lost. So I3 isn't really interesting anymore. Was it I2 or I3 or I1? I don't know, one of those. Anyway, what's important in map tile I is the skill. Bleeding. That's right. This is kind of like very, very similar to the map tile, the field Z5, where you picked up mana leeching. Again, this field will only have one gem that you will be able to use in journey mode, and that's bleeding. The wizard stash is in Endurance, and also for both journey mode and Endurance mode, it's predominantly just giant waves, almost all the time, if not all the time, that you're going to be facing off with. And also, this map is great for using your walls to create a giant maze. Pardon me. Jeez, it's late. To create a giant maze that you can make a mana farm in. So, yeah, you can abuse this one for endurance as well. I4 is actually good for endurance. I find I bet it quite often, actually. And also, bleeding is a great gem to have. You'll find out later on, because you abuse it with shrines to guarantee wins with endurance moving forward, but that's not for, you know, a good couple of thousand wizard levels later, okay? We'll talk about that later. Anyway, once you've beaten that and you've got that, then you go down to quite possibly the most important map tile of the entire game, and that is map tile D, because there are two very, very important things to get here. And I've just realized that Seeker's Sense is not a battle trait, it's a skill, for goodness sake. Okay, D1 has a battle trait. That battle trait is Ritual. What does Ritual do? Ritual allows you to force the game to put onto the field within the, the number of wave stones that are available, up to 13, if you crank it up to the maximum battle trait, up to 13 special monsters onto the field. That's everything that drops Shadow Cores. So that could be Wizard Hunters, Shadows, Spectres, things like Spires as well, and also that little white thing that floats around as well. All of these special monsters, they are goaded into coming into the field. That's very important. Not so much by itself, but it's very important when it's paired with D5. By the way, good luck getting D5 unlocked, because to unlock it, you've got to get the field token from field D4. And yes, that's in a wizard stash, and yes, that wizard stash is insanely difficult to try and crack open in endurance. It's going to take you a while. Remember, you've got your armor tearing, so feel free to crank up the armor tearing and do whatever you can to survive long enough to be able to crack open that wizard stash. But once you do, get a D5 without delay and obtain in that wizard stash the skill Seeker Sense. Seeker Sense is basically, in all honesty, it's a skill that you pump as much skill points in as you can, because it says, I'm going to take whatever shadow cores you get from a map or a field, and I'm going to make that a lot more shadow cores. And also, as a nice little secondary, I'm also going to allow you to get more XP from that field. The secondary isn't so important. What one is the primary? So, this is actually where your game will change a lot. At this point, you might have picked up some talisman fragments that have +1 to something, or +1, preferably +1 to all skills. Those fragments are very good, very important, but they're probably very expensive for you to try and upgrade, and you probably don't have enough shadow cores to keep your fragments all nice and pumped up to their maximum to get the most benefit out of them. Enter map tile D. Get the battle trait Ritual, get the skill Seeker Sense, and then go all the way back up to field S1. It's not even listed here, but go to field S1. Why? Because S1 has just enough wave stones for you to be able to get the most out of Ritual without dragging on the game too much, and also the monsters on field S1 at this point are going to be stupidly simple for you and really easy to beat. And also you can play S1 over and over and over again with Ritual completely maxed out and Seeker Sense cranked up to as high as you can afford to do it. And you can just play S1 over and over and over again and continue to get lots and lots and lots of shadow cores. So this is where your game will start to shift very dramatically. You're basically getting yourself to a point where you will have enough shadow cores. You will do this continuously, playing S2 over and over again until you unlock every single Talisman tile, so that you have free range of the entire talisman, including the corners, and you will also have positioned in there, hopefully, all of the best fragments that you have in a way so that you get also the talisman bonuses from them as well, using the markings and lining those up nicely. So you basically, you kind of pause your progression in the game for the purpose of taking your wizard and setting him up perfectly using all of the shadow cores that you can try and mine, and converting those into strengthening your position within your talisman as much as you can. Because when you get plus to all skills or plus to some sort of skill, generally speaking, when you're putting points into your skills, you want to put them up to something that is a multiple of 5. Okay? And of course, as you get higher and higher into putting more skills, or the skill level on each skill gets higher and higher, the amount of skills you need to put into it just to tick it up to the next level increases again and again and again. It's literally the number of whatever the skill level is that you're going up to, that's the number of skill points you need to put in. So going from skill 0 to skill 5 on any skill will only cost you 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 skill points, more or less, which works out to be, what, 5, 9, 12, 15. 15 skill points. Now try and work it out if you're going from skill level 25 to 30. So you're doing 25 plus 26 plus 27 plus 28. No, it's 26 plus 7, 28, 29, and 30. You do the math on that pretty quickly. That's around about not much below 150. So, yeah. Basically, if you get fragments that have +1 to something, preferably +1 to all skills, then when you get that, instead of continually ticking up all of your skills, you can tick them back 1 every time you get that benefit from your talisman. And when you do that, you get all those skill points back, which means you start with even more mana at the start of every single game, and that gets multiplied even more using the bonuses that you get from your talisman, because you've been a good person and you've lined up all of your fragments with all of the markings nicely within the rows, so that you get a nice large percentage multiplier added to whatever your starting mana is at the start of every field. And so instead of starting every field with, say, I don't know, 20,000 mana, all of a sudden after doing S1 probably 50 or 100 times to get all of those cores and get yourself set up, you'll be starting every field with around about 80,000 or 90,000 mana. And the news just gets better and better from there, because once you do that, then you can go back again and abuse all of the fields that have shrines again. And you can also go to other fields that are very good for doing endurance in, such as fields like Z5 or F1, or even S2 works as well, because you know what? It didn't stop being a great place to do mana farms and also endurance runs. So abuse those fields and continue to beat endurance again and again, and get your wizard level to jump really high yet again. Once you've done that, once you've gone ahead and gotten Ritual and Seeker Sense, oh, that shouldn't even be that color. Yeah, that should. That's right, I made them special. Once you get Ritual and Seeker Sense, go ahead and abuse Field S1 50 to 100 times. Diablo 2 Battle Run style, just continue to beat it over and over and over again. Use Pylons sort of in the 4 corners within range of your main gem that will be placed very close to the Wizard Orb to extend your range and ability to attack special monsters, so that you can reach those out of reach shadows and whatnot. Do that 50 to 100 times, get your talisman in order, and then once you're strong enough, then you will go ahead and beat endurance on all of your usual old favorite places to do endurance on yet again, and you will continue to basically get your wizard level up, and hopefully once you've finished abusing all of that, and you're finally happy and ready to go back on the beaten path by entering field B2, hopefully your wizard level, you should be aiming to have a wizard level of around 2000. I'm not kidding you. That's what you will be doing. Once you are there, go to field B2 and easily crack open the wizard stash for field B5 in a token. B4 has a shrine. It's a great place with a shrine, so abuse that again in endurance as well. B5 has the skill critical hit. That's right. B2 is important because it gives you access to the place that has a wizard stash that's holding critical hit. Once you've got that, then you've got all of the components that you need to beat the game. Critical hit is very important to have because honestly, critical hit as a gem component up until just before you get it in this game is a useless gem because it will only do some of the time a critical hit which will only give you a little bit more damage. It's pathetic. But once you start putting skill points into critical hit, wow, does it change. All of a sudden you'll find that close to 80% of the time, all the time, it's going to be doing a decent amount of damage. So it goes from being a whimper of a gem type to all of a sudden a gem type that's just going to happily do double, triple, 10, 20, 50 times damage that it normally could do. So, and that does that relatively consistently. 4 out of 5 shots do this devastating amount of damage. So, very, very important skill to get. And once you get it, feel free to use it by putting some points into critical hit so that you can not only get a mana farm going, but you can also, in your endurance runs, get a gem that does a mega amount of damage. I recommend you mix in critical hit with a tiny bit of bleeding, or you know what, at this point you're probably going to have enough mana to be able to have a single gem that is dedicated with critical hit and a single gem that is also dedicated with bleeding a little bit further up the trail that's bleeding the monsters that will get hit by the critical hit gem, and that will just amplify the critical hit gem's damage even more. So yeah, and then you've got, at this point, honestly, you can pretty much almost kiss goodbye to slowing because, yeah, you can slow down monsters for your mana farm, but really when you've got a map that's just got monsters flowing in and out of your, you know, the start of the map as well as out of the map using your wizard orb, it's using that like a revolving door, your map is going to be saturated with monsters, then your mana farm, so you know what, slowing really does equate to nothing anyway. So you can kiss goodbye to the usage of slowing, poison, and armor tearing at this point. All that matters is mana leeching, bleeding, and critical hit. Go ahead and just laugh at how easy all of a sudden all of the other fields will be. You can just fly through fields, all of the fields actually in C. You get your final battle trait in C3. That's the hatred battle trait. And also at this point you might start to want to experiment with probably not awakening because it's devastating against you in endurance. Probably not thick air either because that's just devastating in general. Let's see, vital link and strength in numbers. Maybe start experimenting with those, but not much. At this point you should be playing around with swarmling domination and, more importantly, giant domination, because you will be able to dominate those giants as well as those swarmlings for the most part, because at this point at wizard level 2000 you're killing it, you're destroying everything. You probably are ignoring pylons for the most part as well, but maybe you might find some use in them if you've in a situation where you've got, you know, some giants that are just being a little too stubborn right near the end of your endurance and you want to really get just that little bit of extra damage that gives it that bit of kick, then maybe you might want to put down some pylons. So it's always nice to have maybe 10 points in pylons, or pylons up 10 levels, just give them that little bit of extra kick and that little bit of extra range. Let's see, what else? Corrupted Banishment, abuse that a lot. Same with Adaptive Carapace, Overcrowding, and also Haste. You should be cranking all of those up. And you know what? If you get to a point where you're making mana farms that have 20 or even 30 traps full of gems that are grade 3 or higher at the start or something like that, crank up insulation as well. Just make sure that every single gem that is in your mana farm is targeting specifically the priority for shields. That way you can take down all of the shields from the monsters before they even get to your main killing gem. So you know what, that's another freebie at that point. And of course ritual, well, it's up to you as to whether or not you want to put ritual on. When you're doing endurance runs, as you go through endurance and you keep getting more and more waves and you're starting to get up to maybe around 350 waves in endurance, you'll find that you're already getting quite a few shadow cores. So having ritual on and goading in things that you might not be paying attention to, such as wizard hunters, might not be the cleverest idea. So it's up to you as to whether or not you want to use ritual. If you do, just make sure you keep a casual eye on all the entrances for wizard hunters, because yeah, they can really turn your smile into a frown very quickly if they first thing they target is your critical hit gem that is really high grade that you've been working on for ages. That's not going to feel good, especially when the critical hit gem that you've been working on for ages has lots of hits, and therefore it has, you know, basically leveled itself up using the inbuilt bloodbound and pullbound effects that are within every single gem. So it doesn't feel good. But at that point, you get hatred. You'll go ahead and, you know, get the field token for F3. In F4, you'll get the field token for F5. Just play through F and then play through A. Beat the game. And at that point, you'll have figured out pretty much how to play and beat Gemcraft Frostborn Wrath quite easily. If you want more details on exactly how you should be doing things specifically within your talisman and how you should use the fragments that you get, by all means, please, again, I urge you to go ahead and watch my video that I made quite a few months ago about that. That's very important. And also another video you might want to be interested in looking at is a video about mods and how you can use those achievements that have those little symbols on the bottom to go ahead and activate mods. There's a couple of mods in particular that are actually quite beneficial. One allows you to get even more shadow cores from monsters and so forth as you play throughout the fields. And the other one, I forget what it does, but I think it basically makes your gems even stronger at the start or something like that. So there's a couple of mods out there that are very good that you can try and activate yourself. Keep your talisman happy, and that will keep you happy. Honestly, until you get to map tile D though, the game is still going to be a little bit of a grind. It's not going to be easy, but once you get to map tile D, take a pause, go to S1, keep playing it 50, 100, 150 times. It's very boring, but you know what? Do it however many times you need to do it. You only need to do this little trick once. Get your talisman in order. Get a lot of those fragments with +2 skills in as much as you can in your fragments, in your talisman, and honestly, at that point, the game becomes so much easier. Thank you very much for your patience. Again, please subscribe, like the video, leave a comment, let me know what you think, let me know if I missed anything. I didn't go into the details too much because even though this video is over an hour and a half long, I wanted to keep the video short. So by all means, please let me know what you think, and thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.